I want to start today with a thought experiment. It's a little unsettling, but stick with me. Imagine we wake up tomorrow and the government has just dissolved. No constitution, no Supreme Court, no police, just people. In that scenario, do you still have human rights? Or are rights just, a handshake agreement, a social contract that we all decided to pretend exists, but which disappears the moment the enforcement is gone?
That is the terrifying question. It's what keeps legal theorists and, philosophers up at night, because if rights are just a social contract, then they're incredibly fragile.
So fragile.
They depend entirely on the consensus of the group. If the group decides, let's say, 51 to 49, that you don't have rights,
Yeah.
well, under that theory, you don't.
Which is terrifying. I mean, history is full of examples where the majority decided certain people just didn't matter.
Exactly. But if rights are objective, if they're real, regardless of what the government or the majority says, then they have to be anchored in something outside of us. They have to be inherent.
And that, right there, that is the core of today's deep dive. We are looking at a stack of sources that argue that the DNA of human rights, the very thing that protects you and me, traces back to a specific ancient concept, the Imago Dei.
Latin for the image of God.
Right.
And it's a concept from the first chapter in Genesis, but the mission for this episode isn't a sermon. We're going to explore how this theological idea underpins our modern legal system, how it protects the vulnerable, and this is the part that really blew my mind, whether our definition of human can survive in an age where artificial intelligence is starting to act a lot like us.
It's a massive topic. We've got materials from legal scholar George Fletcher at Columbia Law School, papers on AI ethics by Rudy Mimicking, and some really surprising work on ecology and linguistics. But let's start with the source code, so to speak. Fletcher makes a distinction in the text that I honestly had never noticed before. He says there isn't just one creation story in Genesis, there are two.
Right. And most people, they just blend them into one movie in their heads. But Fletcher points out that Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are distinct narratives, and they offer two very different foundations for humanity. And if you care about equality, the difference really, really matters.
Okay, so break it down for us. What happens in Genesis 1 versus Genesis 2?
So in Genesis 1, God creates a singular being, Adam, in his image. And the text says, male and female, he created them. Fletcher suggests, and he's backed by a lot of scholars, that this original creation wasn't a man who was alone and then got a wife later. It was a singular entity created ex nihilo from nothing that contained the potential for both genders, or was maybe even gender neutral.
Wait, so the original human wasn't a guy?
That's the argument. The text implies a singular being that mirrors the divine. And here's why that matters so much for equality. If we all descend from this one singular entity made in the divine image, then we're all fundamentally equal.
Oh, okay.
We're all shards of the same mirror. There's no hierarchy.
Okay, that makes sense. If we all start from the same block, we're all the same value. But then you get to Genesis 2, which is the story everyone knows.
Right. Adam is made from dust, he's lonely, and Eve is made from his rib to be a helper. Historically, legal systems and societies have. Well, they've weaponized that second story. If Eve is made from Adam to help Adam, it's a very short hop to arguing she's subordinate to Adam.
So Fletcher is saying that to get to true, absolute equality, the kind we claim to have in modern democracy, you have to lean into that Genesis 1 narrative.
Exactly. Equality isn't about who came first or who's physically stronger. It's about that shared spark. But Fletcher goes deeper. He distinguishes between holistic rights versus trait-based rights. And this is probably the most practical legal takeaway for us today.
This part really stuck out to me because we do this all the time. We say humans have rights because we're rational or because we have language or because we're self-aware.
And that's a trap. It sounds good, but just think about it. If you base human rights on specific traits like having a high IQ or the ability to speak, you run into a massive problem. What about infants? They can't speak or reason yet. What about someone in a coma? What about someone with a severe cognitive disability?
If rights are a checklist, those people don't check the boxes.
Precisely. If rights are trait-based, those people technically have fewer rights than you or I. They're less human under that definition. But the Imago Dei concept is holistic. It values the whole person as an image, not a collection of skills. You have rights because you are, not because of what you can do.
Fletcher uses a literary example to illustrate this that I thought was just perfect. Shylock from Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice.
It's the classic example. When Shylock is pleading for his humanity, he doesn't pull out a resume. He doesn't say, I'm a smart banker or I contribute to the Venetian economy. He asks, hath not a Jew eyes? affections, passions, fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons.
He's appealing to the basics. I eat, I bleed, I feel.
He's making a holistic appeal. He's saying, look, I am like you in every way that matters. He isn't trying to prove his utility. He's saying that the simple fact of his existence as a feeling, breathing human being entitles him to dignity. That's the secular version of saying, I bear the image.
It shifts the burden from prove you're valuable to you are valuable because you exist. But we need to bridge the gap here. I mean, we don't usually cite the book of Genesis in the Supreme Court. How did this religious idea jump the fence into secular law?
Well, it didn't jump the fence so much as it built the fence. The foundational documents of modern democracy are saturated with this thinking. I mean, look at the American Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal.
Sure, but let's be real. When they wrote that in 1776, they didn't mean all men.
Yeah.
They certainly didn't mean women.
You're absolutely right, and Fletcher notes a fascinating historical shift there. Originally, in 1776, that phrase was largely understood as collective equality. It was a political get-off-our-backs statement to Great Britain. It meant the American nation had an equal right to self-governance as the British nation.
So it wasn't about I have rights. It was about we have rights.
Initially, yes. But then you get to Abraham Lincoln, and this is the genius of the Gettysburg Address. Lincoln takes that phrase, created equal, and he reinterprets it. He turns it into a moral imperative for individual equality.
He makes it personal.
He uses it to dismantle the logic of slavery. He essentially argues that if the Declaration is true, if there is a creator who made us equal, then no man can own another. He took a political statement and turned it back into a theological or moral one.
And then, according to the notes here, the philosopher Immanuel Kant comes in and sort of finishes the job of secularizing it.
Kant is the bridge for the modern secular mind. He translates Imago Dei into the concept of universal humanity. His golden rule was the categorical imperative, specifically the formulation that says you can never use a person merely as a means to an end.
Means to an end. That basically means you can't use a person like a tool.
Exactly. A hammer has value because it drives nails. If it breaks or if you don't need to drive nails anymore, the hammer has no value. Kant says human beings have infinite dignity. You cannot use them just to get what you want. Why? Because they're ends in themselves.
That sounds a lot like the biblical prohibition on murder Fletcher mentioned. Genesis 9.6 says you can't kill another human because they bear the image. Kant is basically saying the same thing without using the word God.
It's the exact same structure of thought. And this leads directly to Fletcher's legal theory about discrimination. And this is really relevant for anyone trying to understand equal protection laws today. He distinguishes between arbitrary discrimination and caste-reinforcing discrimination.
Okay, unpack that.
Yeah.
Because the law discriminates all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I can't perform surgery because I didn't go to med school. That's discrimination.
Right, but that's what Fletcher calls rational discrimination. We distinguish between optometrists and opticians based on training. That's fine. It serves a rational purpose, public safety, and, importantly, you can move between those groups with effort. But caste-reinforcing discrimination is different.
This is the bad kind.
This is when the law creates distinctions that lock people into a lower social status based on things they can't change. Race, gender, legitimacy of birth. Fletcher argues that this violates the judicial imperative of equality. If we're all created equal in the image, the state cannot be in the business of creating permanent underclasses.
It's interesting that this isn't just an American conversation. The sources mention the German Basic Law, the Grundgesetz.
Yes, and that is a very telling parallel. After the atrocities of the Nazi regime, post-war Germany wrote a constitution that didn't just list rights. It started with an absolute statement. Human dignity is inviolable.
That feels like a direct reaction to the Holocaust.
It was. Just as the U.S. 14th Amendment was a reaction to slavery, the German Basic Law was a reaction to the total denial of human value. Both are trying to legally codify this idea that there's something sacred or inviolable about a human being that the state cannot touch.
So we've established that this ancient idea is really the bedrock of how we protect people legally. We moved from the garden to the courtroom, but now we have to pivot to the future. Because there is a new entity entering the chat, artificial intelligence.
This is where the rubber meets the road for the next century.
Here's the problem I see. We just spent 10 minutes establishing that we shouldn't base rights on traits like intelligence. But if we define the image of God, or human dignity loosely as reason or logic, well, I've got an app on my phone that can beat me at chess, write poetry, and pass the bar exam. If AI becomes smarter than us, does it inherit the image of God? Do we lose our special status?
That is the anxiety of our age, isn't it? If we're just thinking machines and we build a better thinking machine, are we obsolete? This is where we turn to the source material from Rudy Tuerminking. He argues that we have to distinguish between functional intelligence and existential consciousness.
Functional versus existential, what's the difference?
Functional intelligence is processing data. It's pattern recognition. AI is incredible at this. It can simulate a conversation, it can solve problems, it can mimic creativity, but Tuerminking argues it lacks self-awareness. It lacks moral agency. It doesn't know it exists.
It passes the Turing test. It can fool a human, but there's nobody home.
Exactly. It has output, but no inner life. And this pushes theologians and ethicists to rethink what the Imago Dei actually is. If it's not just being smart, what is it? Tuerminking points to a shift in theological thinking, referencing scholars like Karl Barth. They argue that the image of God isn't a trait we possess. It's a capacity for relationship.
Relationship, that feels a bit soft as a definition for humanity.
It sounds soft, but think about it deeply. Humans exist in what philosophers call I-thou relationships. We can enter into covenants. We can love. We can be responsible for one another. AI processes information, but it can't make a promise. It can't truly care. It simulates connection, but it doesn't experience it.
So even if the robot is smarter than me, even if it acts like it loves me, it can't look me in the eye and actually see me.
That's the argument.
Yeah.
But Tuerminking warns of a specific danger here, and it's not the Terminator scenario. The risk isn't necessarily that AI becomes human. The risk is that humans start acting like machines.
That's a twist. What does that mean?
Dehumanization. If we define value purely by productivity, data output, and efficiency, we're playing the machine's game. We start valuing ourselves and others only for what we can produce. That erodes the Imago Dei. We risk becoming what Tuerminking calls too artificial, valuing utility over dignity.
That hits hard. You see that in the gig economy, right?
Yeah.
We treat the Uber driver like an algorithm. We treat the customer service rep like a bot. We stop seeing the person.
Exactly. We strip away the I-thou and make it I-it. And once you do that, you're dismantling the basis of human rights. But there was another concept in the AI readings that I found kind of hopeful. The idea of the created co-creator.
This is Philip Hefner's concept.
Yes. It frames AI not as a rival, but as a responsibility. The idea is that we reflect the image of God when we create. God creates, so we create. We built AI. That's a testament to human ingenuity. But because we're created co-creators, we have to do it with ethics. We aren't just building tools for power. We're supposed to be building things that help life flourish.
So we're not just users of technology. We're parents of it, in a weird way. We're responsible for what we bring into the world.
And that responsibility extends beyond technology. It extends to the physical world itself. Which brings us to the ecological part of our deep dive.
Right. This is the controversial one. There's been this long-standing accusation, the source cites historian Lynn White, that the Bible is actually to blame for our environmental crisis.
It's a famous critique from the 1960s.
The argument is basically that Genesis told humans to rule over and subdue the earth, and Western civilization took that as a license to strip mine the planet and pave paradise.
White argued that Christianity is the most anthropocentric, human-centered religion, and that it justified exploitation. But our source, Michael Stead, argues this is a massive misunderstanding of the original Hebrew text. He does a linguistic deep dive that just flips the script.
Let's break down those words. Rule and subdue. I mean, they sound pretty harsh to modern ears. Subdue sounds like you're wrestling something to the ground.
They do sound harsh, but context is everything. Stead looks at the Hebrew word for rule, reda. While it can mean dominion in the biblical context, look at how it's used elsewhere. It's used to describe how a shepherd rules a flock, or how a just king rules the poor.
So it's not tyranny.
No. Psalm 72 uses reda to describe a king who delivers the needy and crushes the oppressor. It implies protection, care, and responsibility. A shepherd who starves his sheep or lets wolves eat them isn't ruling them, he's failing them. He's destroying his own domain.
Okay, so rada is stewardship. But what about subdue? That's the word kibosh. That definitely sounds like military force.
It can imply force, but Stead puts it in the context of agriculture. Remember, the setting of Genesis 2 is a garden. The mandate is to work and take care of the garden. In an agricultural world, subduing the earth means clearing stones, keeping the weeds at bay, making the land productive. It's gardening.
So it's not pave the rainforest, it's weed the carrots so we can all eat.
Precisely. If you let a garden go wild, it ceases to be productive for humans or animals. Subduing is the active work of maintaining order so life can thrive. Stead argues the biblical text actually mandates sustainable development.
Sustainable development. That sounds very modern.
The logic is simple. The earth belongs to God, not us. We're tenant farmers. We're allowed to eat the fruit, but we aren't allowed to destroy the orchard. If we use it up so that future generations inherit a wasteland, we fail in our role as image bearers. We've been bad tenants.
We have definitely been bad tenants. But I like the distinction that the text doesn't grant the license for that. It actually demands the opposite.
It demands that we maintain the system so it remains productive. We're co-creators, remember. A co-creator doesn't destroy the studio.
This has been quite a journey. We started with a mysterious creation account in Genesis 1, moved through the Supreme Court and the fight against caste systems, looked at the face of AI, and ended up in the garden.
It really shows how interconnected these ideas are. You can't really separate the legal protection of human rights from the philosophical question of what a human actually is.
And that brings us back to the central debate we started with. If we take away the image of God, or at least the secular equivalent of absolute human dignity, what happens?
That is the crux of the matter. Without a concept like Imago Dei or a very robust secular equivalent like Kant's absolute dignity, human rights are at risk of becoming a social contract based on traits. And as we discussed, if rights are based on traits like intelligence or usefulness, then the smarter beings or the more powerful groups can theoretically rule the weaker ones.
Or the AI can rule us.
Theoretically, yes. If intelligence is the only metric for rights, a superintelligent AI has more rights than a human. Imago Dei anchors rights in existence itself. You matter because you are here. You matter because you are a person, not because of what you can do.
It's a safety net for humanity.
It is. And I'll leave you with this thought to chew on. As we rush toward a future full of algorithms, enhancements, and biotechnology, we have a choice to make about how we define ourselves. If we decide that human is defined strictly by biological or intellectual capability, we might literally be writing the code for our own obsolescence.
Because there will always be something faster or smarter coming down the pipeline.
Exactly. But if human is defined by the capacity for relationship, for moral responsibility, for stewardship, well, that is something no algorithm can replace. So the question for you is, which definition are you using in your daily life? When you look at the people around you, your barista, your boss, your political opponent, do you see data points and utility, or do you see the image?
That is something to think about next time you're scrolling through your feed or asking a chatbot for advice. Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.